In September 1848, floating in a boat moored in a canal somewhere outside of Shanghai, Robert Fortune had his head shaved clumsily by a hired servant. He then had a long braid of dark hair sewn onto the nape of his neck, before swapping his European outfit for traditional Chinese clothes. Fortune, a 6-foot-tall Scotsman, was disguising himself as his Chinese alter ego, Xinghua, to pass as, in his own words, a very fair Chinaman. He was on a mission to sneak into the forbidden, unmapped interior of China to steal a state secret. But Fortune wasn't a spy. He was a botanist, hired by the British East India Company to collect samples and acquire information on how to grow and process tea. And in successfully doing so, he would change the fate of 2 empires by stealing a plant. This was Fortune's objective, Camellia sinensis, also known as the tea plant. Tea drinking had been a ritual in China for at least 1500 years before it first arrived on European shores at the end of the 16th century. And over the next 200 years, the drink took Britain in particular by storm. First with the upper classes as a luxury item, before its popularity infused through every level of British society. But this was largely due to the East India Company, who held a monopoly over trade with China, the only tea producer in the world, to keep the shipments coming and the tea flowing. And the revenue generated from the import and sale of tea to meet Britain's insatiable demand grew to 10% of the British government's income, funding the rapidly industrialising nation's infrastructure and fueling its growing population of workers. Tea and its trade had become an essential cog in the machine of the British Empire. But there was a problem. China remained closed off to the outside world, only allowing strictly controlled trade through one designated port in Canton. With no interest in trading for Europe's products and goods, China would only accept silver as payment for tea. And this was fine with Britain for a while, until the country's silver deposits eventually began to run low, risking a financial crisis. So Britain came up with a solution to their dilemma. They counter-traded opium grown in British India with the Chinese, smuggling the drug into China, which was paid for in silver, then, in turn, using that silver to purchase tea, fueling a growing opioid epidemic across China. In response, Chinese officials eventually seized and destroyed their supply in Canton, while ransoming British merchants taken hostage, sparking the first opium war between the 2 empires. In the ensuing conflict, China was dealt a series of defeats by Britain, and was eventually left no choice but to sign a peace treaty that ceded Hong Kong to the British and opened up 4 more trading ports on China's coast, granting the West the greater access to Chinese trade they were so hungry for. Meanwhile in India, Britain had been experimenting with their own tea production operation. Native tea plants had been found growing in the Assam province that had recently been annexed into British possession. The resulting tea was lackluster compared to the Chinese tea, but it was passable enough to stir the idea of securing Britain's own tea supply, and therefore the possibility of freeing Britain of the Chinese monopoly, price markup, and increasingly strained relationship between the 2 empires. However, the native Indian variety of the tea plant, the lack of first-hand expertise in how exactly the Chinese produced tea, was responsible for the Indian tea's shortcomings. If Indian-grown tea was to replace the Chinese supply, it had to be better. India possessed the perfect geography for growing tea, but it needed a better stock. Specifically, Britain wanted to source the finest tea plants directly from China's interior, and then transplant them into India. But this was not something China would provide willingly, so the task needed to be carried out covertly. As it happened, Robert Fortune had already risen to prominence doing just that, making a name for himself spending 3 years travelling between the newly opened Chinese trading ports, disguising his way into forbidden cities and evading pirates, all in the name of plant collecting. So the East India Company hired him, financing another 3-year journey into China, but with the sole objective of acquiring the finest tea plant samples he could find. Which brings us back to that boat outside of Shanghai. From Shanghai, he made 2 separate journeys into China's interior. The first sailing up the Yangtze Valley to the green tea regions of the Anhui province to spend weeks collecting plants from the Sunglo Mountains. And on the second, fortune sought samples from the heart of black tea production, located deep in the Wuyi Mountains, a 3-month journey by foot over rough, unmapped terrain. On each trip, he spent time at renowned tea production sites, pretending to be a visiting official, taking detailed notes of their respective processes. Chinese tea production was a carefully crafted series of timings in how tea was plucked, dried, cooked, rolled, cooked again, then sorted by quality. And Fortune observed and recorded every detail meticulously. He then returned to Shanghai with all the plants and seeds he could carry, and one final task: to find workers trained through generations in the science and art of tea making. The population of China was considered the property of the ruling Qing dynasty, and to be caught soliciting them out of the country was too great a risk for a Westerner. Despite this, there was still a thriving underground trade in Chinese labour, and with it a network of compradors, Chinese middlemen loyal to Western merchant houses, with the contacts to probe into the interior of China and find those with the expertise and willing to take Britain's offer to relocate to India for 3 years. So Fortune set sail for India, along with 8 Chinese tea experts and 13,000 tea plant seeds of the finest stock, completing his task and placing the necessary tools in the hands of the British Indian tea operation. And with it, the fates of empires shifted. It was too late by the time China had realised what Britain had taken from them. The British Indian tea operation would quickly grow to overtake China's, providing high-quality tea for more people at lower prices. The British combination of milk, Caribbean sugar, and Indian-grown Chinese tea leaves was one of the early products of globalization, with a supply chain that stretched from east to west. The requirement to boil water for tea sanitized disease-ridden water, improving the health of British city populations, while also providing a cheap, efficient source of calories for workers as the country industrialized. While the theft of such an integral part of China's foreign exchange, in the climate of an opioid epidemic and the aftermath of the Opium War defeat, played no small part in the destabilization of the Qing dynasty and its eventual fall to internal revolution. Tea could therefore be viewed as an icon of the industrialization movement, a product of the British and larger insatiable European hunger for turning the natural resources of the earth into tradable goods, and the pursuit of innovations and free trade that rapidly spurred civilization into a period of prosperity never known before, while also leaving scars on the countries and cultures this movement and hunger tore through, in ways that are still felt to this day. All in pursuit of the perfect cup of tea.